Now let's get to the fun stuff in StarMazer, making triggers and sequences. These are the lifeblood of the game. It makes it so that when we do something, something happens. We already have a sample sequence set up here. If I go ahead and select Slimo and talk to him, he'll go ahead and say something to me. Let's go ahead and adjust this. Now I want to make it so that when I do something different, such as look at Slimo, that we have a different thing happen. Over here we have the trigger editor, which is a list of every trigger in the game. Each one is named to hopefully give it a good description of what it is that it does. We also have a search bar so that we can find triggers. As there's going to be many triggers in the game, it can be difficult to find them just by navigating alone. So if I type Slimo, I might be able to find some of the ones related to Slimo. Additionally, if you select a character, you'll see all the triggers that actually use that object and their conditions. This might not be completely comprehensive, but it can be useful for a quick search. To deselect an object, just click off anywhere in the gray space in the scene view. If we scroll down to the bottom, we can go ahead and create a new trigger. When I do that, it'll automatically add a trigger to the list and give it the name of new trigger and the UID number it has. That's not a very good name for us, so let's go ahead and change this to something that's useful for us. I'm going to prefix it with Wikidemo because that's what we're doing now. We're building a demo for the wiki. But then I'm going to name it just something descriptive, such as look at Slimo. So I know that this revolves around the concept of looking at Slimo. Now our trigger is already created, and it can go ahead and be used, but nothing will actually cause this trigger to happen. What we need to do is add conditions so that we know when the trigger should start its sequence. You can add conditions with this big plus condition button. When you do, it'll by default add a none condition, which means that this trigger will never happen. But if you click on the none, you can select what condition we want to use. We have many different conditions in the game, and each of them are separated by tags. Tags are useful in that they indicate the general idea of what these conditions are related to. In this case, we want to respond to a player action, specifically when the player looks. Now every time you select a condition, you'll need to also select a value for it, so that if that value is ever true, we'll go ahead and perform the trigger sequence. In the case of look, it's looking for an object that the player performs the look command on. So if I click this button, it'll bring up a window to allow me to select any object in the game. In this case, we want to look at Slimo. So by double clicking, I've selected Slimo. And this is good enough. This means that it only has one condition, so that every time the player looks at the Slimo object, this will always happen. This is useful for setting up sort of a default object, so if we look at Slimo, we'll always get this response. This isn't limited to just this level, because we haven't limited any conditions based on this level. If you wanted to add more conditions to make this happen in more specific conditions, we can add more conditions. For example, we might want it so that it only happens when we're in this specific level, PNC level 01. So I can select current level, and I can go ahead and select the level that we're in, which is PNC level 01. So now, the sequence will only happen if both we use the look command on Slimo and if we are in the level PNC level 01. If you select a trigger, it'll open it up in the sequence editor. You can navigate the sequence editor by middle clicking or holding Alt left click to pan around in the view. You can also zoom in with the middle mouse scroll. Every sequence always starts off looking like this. It has a start icon, which indicates what will happen first, and then a blank node. You can click on that node to add an action. This is the action window, which allows us to select any of our actions in the game. As we add more functionality to StarMazer, we'll add more actions, but this is a fairly comprehensive list that allows you to do most of the things you need to do in a PNC or shmup. In this specific instance, I want Brick to say something when he looks at Slimo, so I'm going to select the Show Dialog. I can select this by double clicking on it, and it will automatically add it to my sequence editor. Each action has its own various properties that you can edit when you select it. In the case of the Show Dialog, it has three properties: an object, a line, and a duration. The object is who we want to show dialogue. In this case, I want Brick to show the dialogue, so I'll select this, and it will open up that object selection window. I'll go ahead and select Brick, so we can make sure that Brick is the one that's going to say the line. And here I can type, in the line field, I can type what line Brick's going to say. As soon as I start typing, though, we see that it just pops up in the display here in our scene view, so we can see exactly what it's going to look like in the scene. This is useful because if we keep typing, then we're going to extend this to multiple lines. We want to make sure that it looks nice inside the game. Furthermore, if I want to adjust anything, I can actually just click on the text in the scene and type right there. Finally, I want to set the duration of this. This is how long the text should display. I'm going to set it for 1 second, which is pretty standard for a single line of text. Now we're ready to go ahead and test our action since we've set up some conditions and we've added an action to our sequence. Let's go ahead and play the game and try it out. So now, when I select Sliimo and use the look command, Brick responds. Now what if we want to add a little bit more complexity to this? Right now Brick just shows a line of dialogue, but instead maybe we want him to animate, and maybe we want Sliimo to respond. Well, there's two ways that we can add more actions to our sequence. We can either add them horizontally or we can add them vertically, and each does something different. If we add an action horizontally, that means it's not going to happen until the previous one has happened. So for example, if I want Sliimo to respond, I'll make another show dialogue action. I'll have Sliimo say it this time, and he'll put in a well-written line. So in this current sequence, first, Brick will say his line, which will display for 1 second, and then Sliimo will say his line, which will then display for 1 second. By aligning them horizontally, it indicates that one's going to happen after another. But what happens if we align them vertically? That means that we're going to trigger those actions at the exact same time. So for example, if I want Brick to play an animation while he's talking, I'm going to add another action vertically. In this case, I'm going to add the play animation. I'm going to set up the properties so that Brick will animate here. We want him to play his chat motion. And we want that to play for 1 second, so it'll line up with our current dialogue. And we'll play the previous animation after we're done, so he goes back to his pose. Likewise, I can set this up for Sliimo as well. While he's talking, he'll play an animation. In this case, we want to set Sliimo as the object to play the animation. We want to select his chat animation. And we also want him to return to his previous animation after running this animation for 1 second. So now that our sequence is all set, we can go ahead and test this out as well. So we can follow through with our sequence. If we select Sliimo and select Look, Brick's going to talk as he plays his animation, and then Sliimo is going to respond by playing an animation and then displaying his text.